My name's Tom Romaine. I was on the New Ulm Fire Department as an active firefighter from February of 2001 to February of 2016. And I started with New Ulm late in life. I moved here. I was 48 when I joined the fire department, so I was just under 64 when I retired. And, you know, the heart is still in it, but I can't hardly hear without my hearing aids, and my back gives me problems. So you can be in good shape when you're 64 years old for a 64-year-old, but it's not like being in good shape for a 24-year-old. But firefighting is definitely a young person's game. So we're going to start a little bit just before the Civil War, and then we're going to leave it quickly behind. But the New Ulm's connection with fire goes all the way back to the first winter when the Chicago Land Company was here, and that advance party stayed in a cabin on the future site of New Ulm, and then the cabin burned to the ground in the middle of the winter. So that was the first fire in New Ulm's history, recorded history, I guess. And then in 1862, during the US-Dakota War, fire was used both by the citizens of New Ulm and the Dakota Indians as a weapon during the battle. So after the battle, in the early days of the city of New Ulm, before 1869, firefighting in New Ulm was carried out on a neighbor-to-neighbor basis with buckets, axes, poles, ladders, and I guess if you were popular, people came to your house when it was on fire, and if you weren't popular, maybe they stood around and cheered. But anyway, on December 13th of 1869, the town board held a meeting at the Turner Hall to discuss organizing a fire department. And 46 residents of New Ulm signed up to join the fire department, and which is kind of interesting because the authorized strength of the New Ulm Fire Department to this day is 45 firefighters. And a guy by the name of Charles Wagner volunteered to write the regulations. So in January of 1870, the first organization meeting of the fire department was held, and president, chief engineer of the hose company was selected. They formed a hook and ladder company, a water company or bucket brigade, and a salvage company. And the minutes of the fire department were kept in German until 1887, and the meetings continue to be held in spoken German for some time thereafter that. So the 1870 fire department consisted of a hand pumper, which we still have today and which is still operable, and two very small hand pumps on carts. Everything was pulled by the firefighters. A small hook and ladder, a 2-foot hook with a 20-foot rope, axes, shovels, pike poles, and 20 rubber pails. And the fire station was in the south corner of North German Park. It was 15 feet by 20 feet. So if you look around this room, you could probably got like 4 of the original firehouses right in the room that we're sitting in tonight. Water supply in town was cisterns at 5th North in Minnesota, 3rd North in Minnesota, 2nd North in Minnesota, Center in Minnesota, 3rd South in Minnesota, Center in State, 5th North in State, and German Park. And these were probably just water or rainwater cisterns. The fire department drilled on Sunday morning, which was, I guess, a great excuse for not going to church. And the alarm system at night was the night police officer carried a bugle with him from 1877 to 1882 to notify the fire department. In 1882, a brick fire station was built at 109 North Broadway, and that building was shared with the city clerk until about 1919, and that's the building that New Ulm Tire is in today. In March 20th of 1885, there was a very major fire at First South in Minnesota, where the Merchants Hotel and Barns and the Alfred Held Workshop burned, and they had to tear down the next door neighbor's building to save the rest of the town, and the cisterns were running low of water. So at that point, after that fire, the fire department got a hold of the city council and said, we need better equipment or we're probably going to disband. So the city passed an ordinance reorganizing the fire department on November 9th of 1887, and or 1887, pardon me, and Charles Stoll was elected president. Fred Pfaender, vice president, and Chief Peter Harrion was reappointed by the council. And he had been the previous chief of the fire department. And they ordered a new piece of apparatus, the 18-inch LaFrance steamer, which is still in storage here in town. Then Charles Brust Sr. became the fire chief in 1889, and he served until 1898. And 1890, Hose Company 1 was divided into Hose 1 and Hose 2. And the city put in a pumping station in 1890, developed some water mains, and installed some fire hydrants along Minnesota Street. So that was kind of an improvement in water supply. And then, you know, the two engine companies in town are Engine Company 1 and Engine Company 3. So what happened to Engine Company 2? Does anybody know, besides Trent and Nate? In 1891, Hose Company 2 requested a substation on the south side of town, and the city council turned them down. So they dissolved. And then at that point, Hose Company 3 was organized, and a small shed was built at First South and Valley Street with a hose cart and 500 feet of hose. And then there never has been another Hose Company number 2 in the New Ulm Fire Department. So the 1891, they got a brand new ladder truck. There it is in all its glory, still pulled by the firefighters, 40-foot hook and ladder. And 1895, the first real alarm system went in town with the first 12 fire alarm boxes in town. And then a big step for Engine Company 1, or Hose 1 at that time, in 1896. They put 2 more wheels on their hose cart, and then they started to pull it with a horse. So now you had 1 horse-drawn hose cart and the horse-drawn steamer in the fire department. And then they got a real honest-to-goodness hose wagon in 1898. And then in 1902, the state's Fireman's Convention was held in Turner Hall, which was a big step for a city of this size to have the state Fireman's Convention. 1903, a Seagrave 60-foot ladder was purchased, so the 1891 hook and ladder was replaced. And then Chief Henry Engel served from 1910 to 1925, and if you're really eagle-eyed, you'll look at some of these pictures of people I'm describing as chiefs, and they're not chiefs in the picture, but this is the pictures of the 1913 fire department. And in 1902, when they had the first state firemen's convention, there was a big poster with all the firefighters on it. In 1913, they did the same thing. They had some problems trying to figure out who was who because somebody cut that poster up, and we finally figured out who the people were. The retired firefighters in the library have been working to get the photos and artifacts cataloged, and we're going to celebrate 150th birthday next year. So in 1916, in his history of Brown County, Dr. Louis Fritchie described fire protection in New Ulm as having a volunteer fire company of 45 men, direct pressure from the waterworks and an engine, 122 fire plugs, and 12 miles of fire main. So that's pretty good fire protection for the early 1900s. In 1919, the fire department moved into the City Hall station. So if you're familiar with City Hall and you look on sort of the river side of the building where there's sort of not the same brickwork as the rest of the building, that's where the fire department was from 1919 to 1996. They bought their first motorized apparatus at that time, a 350 gallon per minute American LaFrance. And who reads the Saturday paper with the 50-year and the 100-year ago news? What also happened in 1918 that led them to get motorized apparatus? Livery stable closed. So the fire department never owned their own horses. They got horses from the livery, and when there was no more livery stable, it was tough to get horses. So In 1924, there was a fireman's ball, and this tradition carries on with our the Queen contest and the annual fall dance with the fire department. And the fire alarm box system went through big improvements in 1921 and 1927. And then the hook and ladder of 1903 was motorized in 1925. They just bought a tractor and stuck it under the front end of the ladder truck. And then Chief Fred Pfaender served 1926 to 1930. And then one of the longest fire alarm systems in the city started in 1929 when the New Ulm Rural Telephone Company first set up their fire bar. And that had, they could page out 10 firefighters at home in, per one of the fire bars. And I talked to somebody who was a youngster when their father was in the fire department. They really liked having the fire bar because they didn't have to be on a party line, because they couldn't be on the party line with the fire bar. In 1930, another big fire, Kretsch Garage Fire, and that proved that the 350-gallon per minute engine was kind of inadequate for big fires, so they ordered a American LaFrance 750-gallon per minute engine. And then nobody's here from Engine Company 3, but anyway, the 350-gallon per minute engine got cascaded down to Engine 3. So it's always, Engine 3 always kind of gets stuff after everybody else does. So sometimes it's a bone of contention. Chief Groebner served from 1931 to 1950. He was the longest serving fire chief in New Ulm to date. And Engine Company 3 got a brand new brick station, 26 by 32, still would fit in this room, and a 47-foot drill tower in 1936. Chief Groebner established the first rescue company in 1932. And then in 1936, I wish I had better pictures of these. I know they're there, but we're still working to get those things archived. This is a work in progress, so it'll get updated. Anyway, in January 24th of 1936, there was a major fire in downtown, burned down 12 businesses and professional offices, caused $250,000 worth of damage in 1936, was a big chunk of change. Middle of the Depression, temperatures of 35 degrees below zero, and it froze up Engine 3. So now, if you look at the two engines the fire department had at that time, the pumping capacity of the two of them together is about 1,100 gallons a minute. And there are 4 engines in the New Ulm Fire Department today. Each one of those engines is 1,250 gallons per minute. So I can't imagine trying to fight a downtown fire with just one engine, let alone 2 that don't equal that one. So you know, like what happens a lot of times, in February of 1936, the fire department ordered a new engine and a new ladder truck. And in 1936, the first 1,000-gallon per minute engine came from Peter Pirsch in Monroe, Wisconsin. And then 1937, Pirsch 65-foot ladder truck. The first rescue boat and equipment came in 1938. And in June of 1950, the Minnesota State Fire Department Association had their diamond anniversary meeting at Turner Hall. And then January 8th of 1950, or on January 7th, Senator Hubert Humphrey came to the Turner Hall and gave a really rousing speech, and that night the Turner Hall burned down. So it supposedly started in the balcony, so maybe somebody was unhappy with Senator Humphrey's speech. Firefighting outside the city limits of New Ulm sort of kind of comes under the purview of the New Ulm Rural Fire Association, and it's composed of the townships of Cottonwood, Siegel, Milford, the south half of Lafayette, and part of West Newton townships. And they contract with the city of New Ulm. They own an engine, and this is the brand new tanker of 2015. And contract with the city to supply the staff and house it and do light maintenance on it. And in turn, for that contract, we provide rural fire protection, and then they collect money from people who use their services. Chief Roman Brust served from 1951 to 1959. He got a new rescue truck from Civil Defense, and they had an auxiliary of Civil Defense auxiliary of 24 people. Somebody had just sent me today in the article that was in the paper that said I work for the DNR as a Dorister. I was not a Dorister, I was a forester. And one of the guys that used to work for me sent some stuff that he found while he was working in cleaning up his office, and it was what forestry was supposed to do post-nuclear holocaust. And it was actually somebody had sat down and written that. And one of the things the forester was supposed to do was to find some piece of paper that hadn't been vaporized in the nuclear explosion and report on what the capabilities of firefighting were after the Holocaust. And then they were supposed to go out and do an inventory of whatever trees were left. I thought that was a great piece of bureaucracy. In 1955, they finally traded off the 1919 LaFrance for a brand new Pirsch 750 gallon per minute pumper. And then the 1950 to 59, the fire alarm box system was renovated. April of 1957, the Eagle roller mill burned to the ground. Engine House 3 was expanded, doubling its size. And in 1959 to 1930, LaFrance engine was traded off for another Pirsch engine. Chief Elmer, if you see these slides where the patch comes back up, I don't have a picture for that yet, but I'll be replacing that. Served from 1960 to 1969, and this is the time period when the fire department started to get self-contained breathing apparatus instead of filter masks or pulling your collar up over your face. So. In 1966, the State Fire Department Association held their 91st meeting at the Armory, and at that time the steam engine had been renovated and fixed up, so this is the steam engine in the parade, and then it was in running condition at that time, and I guess that was a big hit at the meeting. January of 1967, Backers Drug, Green's Clothing, and the Newell Medical Center in the Fritchie block just next to the City Hall burned and was heavily damaged, and there were 2 fires in that building in the same week. 1969, got a brand new ladder truck, and it cost $49,000, and we'll talk about costs of fire equipment in a bit. Chief Elmer Tomschin served from 1970 to 1973. In 1970, we got Engine Company 1 got a new Mack engine. April 23rd of 1971, there was a fire with a fatality above the Ben Franklin store. Chief Louis Lowinske served from 1974 to 1984. And in 1974, the alarm box system was replaced with the first pagers. And this was probably about the same time that the fire bar was going out. So that fire bar system was in place here in town for 60 years, and the alarm boxes were here for probably close to 75. So big step forward with pagers. Problem with the fire bar is you only get the call if you're in your house, and then the pagers allowed firemen a little bit more freedom, and it made for easier dispatching. In August of 1974, the Rural Fire Association bought a General engine. That was $50,000 then. In October, the Brown County Fair Grandstand burned down. And then July 7, 1976, the first 1,250 gallon per minute engine came. That was a $60,000 engine. And it replaced what's now Engine Company, engine number 3, which is our parade unit and sort of the celebratory unit. And if you request it, you can get your last ride in Engine 3. That will take you to your gravesite. In the summer of 1977, there was a drowning in the Cottonwood River that wound up in a 42-hour search by the Fire Department Rescue Squad, the Police Department, and the Sheriff's Office. March of 1980, the Wagon Wheel Restaurant burned in Essig. Total loss was estimated at $350,000 to $400,000. The water system in Essig at that time, and I don't know if it's been upgraded, but it was just designed for residential and business use. So it was inadequate to provide enough fire flow to really do a good job on fighting the restaurant fire. And I made this presentation at the Junior Pioneers meeting, and after I mentioned this, he came up and explained why the water system was inadequate. So it was good to get that. April of 1980, the Fritchie Farm Service out on KC Road gets burned down from a neighbor's grass fire. We had a total loss. The Poor Farm Fire was in September. In 1981, all the fire departments in Brown County got one hazmat suit from the county. So the beginning of working on hazardous materials response. In December of 81, the International Multi-Fields Rye Mill burned down. And then on November 6th of 1982, elevator fire in the same place, First South and Valley. And that one was a mutual aid response from Sleepy Eye and Cortland. And Sleepy Eye brought their snorkel truck up, which is like a big bucket truck that pumps, and was credited with doing a really good job on that fire. July 10th of 1983, along with Lafayette and Winthrop, Gaylord, and Cortland, responded to Lafayette for the explosion and resulting fire from Sims House of Furniture and Bargain Center. And then November of 1984, a group of retired firefighters went to an auction in Winona County and bought back the 1919 LaFrance for $7,000, which is probably substantially more than it cost in 1919. But I was also at that auction. I didn't know any firefighters from New Ulm, but I went to the auction because it was kind of a roadside museum in the county, so just a real funny coincidence. Jerry Plagge was chief from 1985 to 1992, and a real good example of community support here in New Ulm was that in the January of 1986, the American Legion donated $1,500 for the fire department to buy the first set of airbags to help lift and stabilize vehicles and other things when you have an accident and you're working on them. I think we're still using those. Or Trent and Nate are. I'm retired, so I'm not. I stand up in front of people and tell lies. So, Engine Company 3 at Goosetown, major remodeling of the engine house there for about $265,000, and that's brought Engine Company 3 or the Goosetown station into the configuration it is today. In June of 1989, Forstner built a 1,250 gallon per minute engine. That was $133,000, so the costs keep escalating. And right now, that's our engine 1, and it's going to be replaced in May. So we're getting new engine from Engine Company 1, and I'm sure that engine 10 will go to Goosetown. It won't? Is it going to, where's the new truck is going to 3s, okay. Yeah. But then they'll get to keep 31s. Yep, all right, okay. October 13th of 1991, there was an 8-year-old boy was lost in a house fire. By the time the fire was discovered, the flames were out of the windows, prevented the neighbors and the fire department from rescuing that person. Cause, they thought, was improper gasoline use and ignition sources. Truck 70 was a 1992 Seagrave ladder, purchased in August of 1992, $380,000. Okay, cost, replaced the 1969 ladder truck. David Clancy was chief from 93 to 94. In November of 1993, the partially built Garden Terrace apartments burned. The alarm and sprinkler systems were not yet active. Mutual aid from Cortland and Nicollet, and the west third of the building was saved, and the relatively new Seagrave ladder truck was credited with much of that save. In May of 1994, another fatal house fire caused by improper use of smoking materials. And then July of 1994, canoe went over the Cottonwood River Dam. One person was lost, 2 people were saved, and the lost person was recovered the next day, and that kind of led to speeding up the removal of that dam later in the year. The New Ulm Rural Fire Association bought the present engine 40 that's in the firehouse in 1994, 1,250 gallon per minute pumper. And we also took delivery of our present rescue truck that year. And then David Wolf served as chief from 1995 to 2002. And in April of 1996, the new fire station, present fire station, main station, was broke ground. So the biggest event of 1996 and 1997 was moving into the main fire station. And the apparatus in the City Hall was very tight. I was not on the fire department. I've talked to people who were then and said that if you wanted to walk around the apparatus, you had to do it with the overhead doors open because you couldn't walk completely around the apparatus. The floor was spongy because of the weight of the apparatus, and things were pretty much worn out. The new fire station was roomy, still is. It was newly furnished. Had a system for filling self-contained breathing apparatus that they didn't have in the old system or station. And what made the move was the hollow steel fire pole. So did anybody remember reading about that in the paper recently? So the city council had been told by the fire chief that they were trying to pick between a solid brass fire pole and a hollow steel one, and he said, we can get by with the hollow steel one because it'll be a couple of years before we have a full-time paid fire department. So we still don't have a full-time paid fire department. we have what's called a combination department. I'll get to that but everybody in the fire department except for the chief serves for this much money. So. And then we moved the fire department sign that used to be over the door, and the red lantern that was on the outside of the fire station, now in the new one. Big change for the New Ulm department in 1996 is when Shelley Skindelin joined the fire department as the first female firefighter in the department. And I met Shelley. She's a dispatcher for the Fillmore County Sheriff's Office. It's across the street from the Preston Forestry Office, and that was in the area of people I supervised. So I met Shelley before I moved here. When I came here to the ladder company, the helmet they gave me still said Skindelin on the back. So I had to peel Shelley's name off, so I wore her helmet for a bunch of years. The 1955 Pirsch engine was converted into a parade unit. This is the time period when the 911 system came into play and the Brown County Law Enforcement Center took over dispatching. And that was a big improvement in dispatching the fire department. 1997, April of 97, the Sewing Center fire caused an estimated loss of about $100,000. March and April of 1998, the department provided several days of mutual aid to Hanska and Comfrey in that devastating series of tornadoes that's kind of stretched from west of Comfrey all the way into Wisconsin, north of Red Wing. Missy Visser joined Engine Company 1 in 1999. She eventually became the first officer, female officer of the department when she became lieutenant of Engine Company 1 in 2008 and captain of Engine Company 1 in 2015. And she became the first female chief officer when she was appointed to be second assistant chief in January of this year. 5 snowmobilers were rescued from Clear Lake on January 4th of 2000. Fire destroyed a restaurant on February 1st of 2000. And my understanding is that one of the firefighters was standing at the door during the overhaul phase of the fire. He had a bunch of menus in his hand, and as the firefighters were coming and going, he's asked people what they would care to have, and then he apologized as they handed them the menu that everything was toast. So, but the end of the year, I moved to New Ulm in November of 2000, and shortly after we moved here, we were in the house and we heard this huge bang, and that turned out to be on December 17th, and that's when somebody's unattended turkey fryer in the garage exploded along with several other propane bottles, and it pretty much totaled the garage and did quite a bit of damage to the house. April of 2001, fire department was busy with flood response on South Valley Street, and then the new engine 31 came in 2001, replaced the engine 30 of 1976, and that the next piece of apparatus that comes in will move the 2001 Peterbilt in sort of reserve status, right? That's where it's going, down to threes. But Trent and Nate are active on the fire department now. I am no longer, so. Early in 2002, there were 3 suspicious fires. One was a mobile home fire. Then there was a dumpster fire at New Ulm Telecom storage shed, and then a fire in a New Ulm Telecom truck. And then these were sort of too coincidental to be just coincidental. And the investigation came up with a suspect, and the suspect put in an Alford plea, which is an admission that I'm not guilty, but the state probably has enough evidence to convict me, and he took an Alford plea on those. Then Curt Curry became chief in 2003. The rescue crews found 2 missing children in a rural search on August 8th. And 3 fires in 2003, residential fires, caused a combined estimated fire loss of over $450,000. And 7 city and rural fires in 2004 caused an estimated fire loss of over $700,000. And then in July of 2004, the old fire station, now the New Ulm Tire Company building, caught fire, and that was an estimated fire loss of $200,000. That was a very hot, smoky fire. It was so, you know, when you burn tires are real dense smoke, and I would talk to one of my fellow firefighters at the end of that fire, and he said, you know, it was so smoky in there, we crawled underneath the smoke, dragging a hose, and when the smoke cleared, we discovered that we had crawled underneath a lift with a car on it. So, probably one of the most serious fires we've ever had in New Ulm took place on December 1st of 2004 at the AMPI plant, and that would have had some serious economic impacts. The possible start was in a compressor in one of the refrigeration units, and it spread throughout the refrigeration unit, involving an estimated 1 million pounds of butter. So New Ulm and the New Ulm Rural Fire Association's ladder truck, 4 engines, tanker, and rescue van were supported by Sleepy Eye's snorkel engine and tankers, Cortland's engines and tankers, and Lafayette's engines and tankers, and there were 78 firefighters working on that fire at the peak of the response. Effective interior attack was impossible with the high rack storage of butter, and most of the fire started spreading through void spaces between the ceiling and the roof, and we had to discontinue inside operations and go outside. There's a good firewall, and good firefighting kept the fire in the refrigeration unit and out of the production line, and the fire was eventually controlled by the early morning of December 2nd. And then, so when you combine hundreds of thousands of gallons of water and 1 million pounds of burning butter, it quickly becomes almost an environmental disaster. But quick work by the public works employees got most of the storm drains blocked. About the only ones they missed was storm drains that already had fire apparatus parked on top of them. So the DM&E Railroad, that's who owned it at the time, the railroad right-of-way was acting as a dike. That gave way at about 4 in the morning. So there was a lot of, the weather was with us on the butter. It was cold enough so that the butter was kind of congealing and not flowing into the river. The Pollution Control Agency assisted in mitigating some of those impacts. Foam, firefighting foam, was trucked in from adjoining fire departments and from 3M in Hutchinson and St. Paul. And mop-up continued into the morning of December 2nd. And about 2 in the morning, they came around and they picked people who were going to go home and get rested, right? So you left the fire scene at 2 o'clock, you got to be back at 7. So estimated fire loss was $15 million. 136 jobs were at risk. AMPI pledged to continue operations in New Ulm and was supported by promises of assistance from the city and state politicians. And fire apparatus required extensive degreasing because it was in everything. At one point, Sleepy Eye's snorkel was in a low spot, and when you opened the doors on the snorkel, this water butter mess was flowing through the cab of the apparatus. So all the turnout gear had to be replaced. That's like 78 cents a turnout gear. We lost 5,500 feet of fire hose. You just could not clean the butter out of it. And then the city was still cleaning butter out of the streets and the storm sewer system into the spring. So it was a real mess. Fortunately, you know, the lesson learned on that is that this is what a hazardous materials fire would do to you, you know, because you track butter everywhere. There was butter all over the firehouse, butter on the floor. Of course, and if you know Scott Winchell, then Scott's a nice guy, great sense of humor, and he was on the ladder company at the time, and he was walking around. He said, "Don't worry about it. It'll all be butter tomorrow." So, so 2005 was a lot quieter. The only really happy person from the AMPI fire was the guy from Hyman Fire Apparatus, the salesman. Now, this is right before Christmas, right? So these salesmen work on about a 10% commission. So he got to replace 78 sets of turnout gear, which is about $1,000 a pop. And then all of the self-contained breathing apparatus all needed to be rebuilt. So you wanted to just go up there and say, "Steve, stop smiling." You know, it's like Santa came early for him. But in 2005, Truck 70, the ladder truck, had to go in for some extensive repairs, and it was temporarily replaced with trucks 71, 72, 73, and 74. So the public utilities lent the fire department a bucket truck, and then all of the gear and tools and self-contained breathing apparatus had to come off the ladder truck when it was sent out of town to be repaired. And then it was scattered over all these trucks without any lighting in them. So the ladder company would get to a fire, and somebody would jump up in the truck and start pitching turnout gear out of the back of the truck. Well, it's all sized to fit each individual firefighter. And it was kind of a confusing several months, and we were really glad to get Truck 70 back. So in the 2000s, there was a fire above Smiley's Tavern and an apartment up there, and a real hot fire. The first-in hose company went up the stairs with an 1 3/4 hose, and the fire knocked them right back down the stairs. It was too hot. And the loss on that was about $100,000, and the one problem that we had on the fire was when firefighters went into Smiley's to tell the patrons that the building was on fire, they had a hard time getting them out because they didn't believe the building was on fire. They were going to stay. But, excuse me. During the summer of 2006, we had a very trying time for the fire department. Firefighter Troy Curry was fatally injured at work, and then we had a very formal funeral for Troy. He was a fellow ladder company firefighter. Engine 10, new engine 10 came in 2006 Spartan. In 2006, that was about a $300,000 piece of apparatus, so the prices keep going up on that. And then on April 20th at Martin Luther College, the Bloomington bomb squad came down and removed 2 pipe bombs from a car at the college. Chief Paul Macho started in 2008. He continues to be the chief today. We had a rural fire that was a methane explosion in a hog barn, and it just kind of blew up, consumed all the oxygen, bulged the building, and that was the end of the fire. Kind of an interesting thing. 2008, there was an apartment fire downtown where four persons were rescued from the windows by fire crews. And then another semi-humorous incident. On August 15th, there was the ultimate drive-in experience at McDonald's, where individual parked their Winnebago above the McDonald's and either didn't put it in park, or the transmission slipped, or the brake wasn't set, and the Winnebago rolled down the hill and came to rest in the drive-in window in McDonald's. Nobody was hurt, a little bit of property damage. 2 people were rescued from a capsized canoe on May 18th of 2009. And then a disoriented elderly male wandered away from his residence on November 18th, 2009, became the subject of a citywide search, and it was found not too far from the house he was living in. He had walked into a similar looking house that was open in the morning and sat down, made friends with his family dog, made himself a little bit of breakfast, and he was watching TV when one of the firefighters found him. So it was good, nice, turned out very well. Then for about the next 4 years after Valentine's Day in 2010, the department had a series of fires with civilian fatalities. And the first one was this particular fire out on the edge of town, where 2 people lost their lives in a house fire. And the response to this was complicated by the fact that they had never really plowed their 900-foot-long driveway. And apparatus got stuck on the way in, snowplows got stuck, and took us about an hour and a half to get good access to where we could finally get water on there. This was beyond the hydrants in town. So 2 persons again recovered from a capsized canoe in the flooding Minnesota River on April 18th of 2011. And then there was a house fire just on the north side of downtown on April 22nd of 2011. We saved 100 concertinas. So another thing that could have been hazardous materials issue, but it was a semi-load of granular fertilizer tipped over at the intersection of Broadway and 7th North and tied up traffic for several hours while crews from Crystal Valley came to shovel 50,000 pounds of fertilizer back into another truck. It was kind of an interesting thing. And then on June 7th of 2011, debris furning fire got away, burned down three barns in the country, in the rural area. This is probably the most tragic fire, greatest fire loss of people in New Ulm's history. The cause was attributed to candles on the front porch at the Bohemian bed and breakfast, but 6 people were lost, 3 of them residents of the home and 3 were overnight guests. 1 person was rescued by ladder, 2 jumped out of windows. And strong winds lined up with the grand stairway and just pushed fire right up into the upper floors. Fire crews were unsuccessful in being able to enter the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor to do search and rescue. Cortland provided mutual aid assistance. The fire department, or the fire investigation on this fire, lasted for the next 5 days between the state and the fire department and the insurance investigators, which required 24-hour supervision of the site by the fire department and the police department. So that became a long-term project for us. And then peer counseling and debriefing services were offered to the fire, law enforcement, and EMS staff responding to this fire. And then in December 8th of 2012, we had another fatal fire in the rural area. And the major issue with this is you couldn't get into the building to do search and rescue because there was so much personal property inside the building. We spent several days in June of 2013 working with Cortland to try to find a missing kayaker on the Minnesota River. along with DNR conservation officers and the Blue Earth County Sheriff's Office. Then on February 27th of 2014, Engine Company 3 crews were the first in on a second floor apartment fire, and they discovered a deceased person in the living room of that fire. But fortunately for the rest of the residents in the building, the resident of the first floor alerted them and they got out of the building, and the fire originated in a plastic kitchen garbage container. And in January of 2015, Chief Macho became the last volunteer fire chief of the New Ulm Fire Department and the first career chief of the New Ulm Fire Department. And he's also the city fire inspector. So what makes us now a combination department is we have one career employee, and at this point right now, 40 volunteers. Pardon me? And a part-time secretary, yes. Is she full-time now? Okay, I apologize, but she doesn't count as a firefighter. So, if it was just Christie, we could still be a volunteer fire department. But if it was, once you start paying firefighters, you become a combination department. In 2017, the city built a storage shed that the fire department and the police department share, and that's really been a boon for us because we finally have climate-controlled storage for the 1870 hand pumper, the 1888 LaFrance steam engine, and the hose and the coal carts that went along with that, and then the 1919 LaFrance and the 1930 LaFrance engine. And then 2016 and 2017, retired Chief Jerry Plagge and Jim Flatto and several other of the retired firefighters worked really, really hard and got the 1919 LaFrance mechanically restored, although it hasn't been cosmetically restored, but it's showed up at several classic car hops in the past couple of years. A new ladder truck came in 2016, a new truck 70, and that replaced the 1992 Seagrave. And then April 17th of 2016 was the Perkins fire. Suspected cause, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Trent, but was smoking materials outside the restaurant. Yeah. And then the restaurant was closed for several months, but fortunately no injuries of firefighters or any public members. And then on a real hazardous materials incident in February of 2017, new homeowner inadvertently took like a pail of mercury and put it in a dumpster. And when the person from Riverview Sanitation showed up to pick it up and picked it up, put it in the Packer truck and recognized what had happened, he was smart enough to just stop. But several days of decontamination ensued of the garbage truck, the dumpster, the alley, and it required the disposal of 1,465 pounds of contaminated waste. So that's an expensive proposition there. The fire department again assisted the Bloomington Bomb Squad in the disposal of dynamite found in a rural residence that was being demolished. So I can remember the days of people blowing stumps with dynamite. So we got a new wildland engine in 2017. And then last summer, the B J Laundromat was set fire by an arsonist, and that had the potential to become a fire similar to the 1936 downtown fire. The fire was contained by quick action by the fire department into the laundromat, although there was smoke and water damage to the Chamber of Commerce, Jacobs and Meidel Music Store, and the Firth Insurance Agency. So that's kind of the thumbnail history of the fire department. I wanted to talk a little bit about a few things. The cost of fire apparatus. And people, one of the questions firefighters get asked all the time is, why does fire trucks cost so much? And the reason why fire trucks cost so much is that, you know, the engine and the drivetrain and the chassis, that's all truck parts, right? But then the rest of that fire truck, that's almost handmade. It's a custom job, and that's, You know, I don't know anybody who produces a commercial fire truck. It's hard to buy them any other way than what it is. And after about 20 years, you can't get parts for the fire truck parts of these things. I was second assistant chief for 6 years, and the major part of the second assistant chief's job off the fire ground was trying to maintain and keep the fire trucks running. And when you got something that was over 20 years, it was really hard to find parts. We punched a hole in the waterway on that 1992 Seagrave, and we had to have the waterway rebuilt. There was a guy in North Carolina that a repair company found for us who actually fabricated a brand new waterway. There was no place to find it as a part anymore. I called Seagrave and they were giggling at me over the phone. You know, you want what? For a 1992 what? but anyhow, so that's that. Big improvements in fire apparatus. They've got cabs. Nobody's riding outside anymore. When I started, fire trucks had open dog houses in the back. I never was in the era when you stood on the tailboard and hung on. But it was a real treat coming back from a fire at 15 to 20 below zero with your basically outside just with a roof over your head. People aren't standing on the side of the trucks in the street. Lots of fire departments or firefighters got hurt with that. They're inside with in the cab with the control stations, and this is probably an audience that remembers manual transmissions, right? But you can't. I have a manual transmission in my personal vehicle, but it's hard to find people who can drive a big rig. So most fire trucks they all come with automatic transmissions now. Our personal protective equipment is a lot more effective. It's heavier, it's more heat resistant, more moisture resistance, and helmets went from leather to steel to plastic to the composites we wear today. So that looks like a leather helmet, but it's a composite. SCBA, or self-contained breathing apparatus, has gone from 30-minute steel bottles to 60-minute supposedly composite bottles that are a lot lighter with a lot more indicators that you're running out of breathing air. We have attachments on the self-contained breathing apparatus that let us share air instead of having to take your mask off and give it to somebody who needs in help of buddy breathing. We have enough handheld radios now that anybody that's going inside, each team can have a handheld radio to communicate. Thermal imaging devices have come down about 90% in price since they were introduced. Allows us to find people that might be trapped in the fire much more quickly than we could, and we can see where fire is hidden in the buildings. And have a lot of mutual aid agreements that tie us all together. Big thing on car accidents is the crush zone that's been engineered in all cars. And I've been started back in the early 90s of working on vehicle extrication. I was just amazed by the time I left the fire department at what kind of an accident where you'd peel the car away from people that they would walk away from. And then 20 years ago, you would have been carrying them away from it. The big challenges for fire departments is changing construction. And then if you look around this room, everything's basically jellied gasoline. You know, it's all hydrocarbons. So fires are burning a lot hotter with a lot more toxic products in the smoke. We built a new house 3 years ago. It's built out of Tinker Toys. You know, it's great structural engineering, but if it starts to burn, it comes apart real fast. We're exposed to a lot more hazardous materials. They're toxic. Some of them are carcinogenic. And then I come from the era where bloodborne pathogens started to become a real issue for firefighters. The recruitment and retention of volunteers is becoming a problem for volunteer fire departments all over the country. It's not as serious as it is here, but there are some places in the East Coast where, you know, the average house price is pushing $700,000-800,000 for what would go for $150,000-200,000 here, and the people who can afford those houses are usually not interested in being on the volunteer fire department. But on the good news, the upside is that the New Ulm Fire Department has an insurance service organization rating of 3. So what the heck does that mean? But the premium that you pay for the fire insurance portion of your household insurance, homeowner's insurance, uses the insurance service organization to help them set rates, and it's on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is absolutely no fire protection at all. New Ulm has a rating of 3. So if you look at all the fire departments in Minnesota, there are about 800 of them. 65 have a rating of 3, 2 have a rating of 2, none have a rating of 1. So we do pretty well with that. And then the fire department is still very much involved in the community. We support the Queen contest financially and with firefighters and their families, chaperoning them and getting them to and from events. And if you come to the dance and you send in money for the dance tickets, this supports the Queen contest. And then well, we have some firefighters that are really skilled at working with young folks. This is school visits during Fire Prevention Week. So how many people have ordered pizza on the week of fire prevention and get the fire department to deliver pizza to you? That's one of our community things. Trent was real involved in helping set up the Arctic Plunge, and last month, or two months ago now, yeah. So we do National Night Out. What else have we got cooking? If I'm put you on the spot here. Yeah.
We're doing Optimus.
Yeah. The real fun event is every Christmas season, Officer Widmark at the police department and his family coordinate Shop with a Hero. So you get to meet some people who are getting a good Christmas due to the community support for this. And the fire department sends a bunch of people down there every fall. So quick human interest story. This is not from this fall, but this December, the young boy that I was working with, we were just talking. We were eating donuts. You know, the cops bring donuts. Come on. So we were eating donuts and drinking coffee and having some orange juice. And he was there with his mom, and we were making some conversation. I said, "Well, what do you want for Christmas?" He said, "I want a red bicycle." I thought. So we're at Runnings, and generally every year Runnings provides bicycles. And I didn't want to say a word because I didn't know if they had them or spoil this, so I kept my mouth shut through all of this, which is really hard for me to do. And so Santa Claus came and said, the kids sat on Santa Claus's lap and they got a bag of goodies, and then the Grinch came, and the Grinch had them walking all over the store, and they finally got down to the aisle, and there was the bicycles with a red set of handlebars on it, and this kid was in orbit. He was just so happy. It was really, really a nice thing. So we hire prospective firefighters in the fall, so if anybody's interested, the ad will be in the paper. Fill it out and go to the city hall and apply to PUC. I haven't seen an application since 2001, so. And then, you know, we're hopeful of another 150 years of service to the community. So with that, well, thank you for being a great audience, and hope you enjoyed it.